Do you still have questions about this year's ballot questions? Me too, and I have been reporting on them. So we've invited Evan Horowitz, the executive director of Tufts Non-partisan Center for State Policy Analysis, to answer them, starting with question 1. But before we jump into that, let's take a look at the basics.
What would question 1 on the Massachusetts ballot do? Question 1, which is sometimes referred to as the Fair Share Amendment or Millionaire's Tax, would amend the state constitution to add a new 4% surtax on a person's annual income over $1 million. Currently, everyone who makes more than $8,000 a year in Massachusetts pays a 5% tax on their income. A yes vote on question 1 would keep that, plus it would tack on an additional 4% tax on every dollar over that 1 million income threshold. A no vote would keep the system exactly as it is now. If passed, the amendment is projected to generate more than $1 billion a year in new state revenue, and it steers that money toward the high priority areas of education and transportation, but leaves it to lawmakers to decide exactly how to spend it. Supporters say the change would make the state's tax system and economy more equitable and would help fund better public schools and needed road, bridge, and transit improvements without reaching into most people's pocketbooks. Critics say the extra tax is a blank check, and there's no guarantee lawmakers would use the money to boost education and transportation spending. They also warn wealthier people could leave Massachusetts and take their businesses with them. The question comes to voters as inflation is making it harder for towns to invest in roads and schools, and as an estimated $3 billion is being returned to taxpayers, because the state took in more than is allowed under current law. Whether question 1 passes or fails, it will be hard to change the tax setup we end up with down the road, likely requiring another multi-year process to add another amendment to the state's constitution. So if you want the additional 4% surtax on top of the existing 5% rate for income over $1 million, vote yes on question 1. If you want to keep the current tax setup and the 5% flat rate, vote no.
That was Katie Lannon reporting. Evan Horowitz, thank you for being here to sort this stuff out. First off.
Well, let me say hi first off. Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. And I was saying to you before the camera started rolling, I find the work that you guys are doing incredibly useful just because there's so much noise from both sides. Whenever we have a ballot question, and being able to go to someone who is trying to establish what's true it's just really useful.
I'll say the same about this. I mean, Katie does a great job. Your animations are great. I thought the piece mostly covers the major impacts on the tax side, on the spending side, on the challenges.
Well, let's talk about what it might not have hit, because I did a couple of these. Not sure I did it as well as Katie did right there, but it's tough to pack in everything into a short period of time. So what, if anything, might we not have touched on in that particular segment that people should be thinking about?
I mean, I think, one of the things we're trying to bring to this conversation is something beyond the proponents say this, critics say that, right? And as a journalist, it's very easy to do that. Well, we talk to the proponents, they make this argument. We talk to the opponents, they make this argument. But then to say, well, who's right? And that's sort of where, we come in, where our work really is focused. Who's right? So I think, for instance, is this money really going to end up going to education? So this is a big question.
That's a huge one. So what's the answer there? Because as Katie mentioned, the opponents say, okay, the supporters of this say it's going to go to transportation and education. That's all great, but there's no guarantee they're going to do it. Is there a guarantee they're going to do it?
No, there's no guarantee that they're going to do it. So what's interesting about this is I think the answer is it really is a kind of in-between, but not because they're required to. That is, there is no legal requirement that will force legislators to use this money to increase spending in the targeted areas, in the earmarked areas. However, they're likely to do it anyway. And the reason they're likely to do it anyway is because these are high priority areas. People want to spend money on education, on transit and transportation. So if you have more money, you're going to use it for the things you care about. And we looked at other examples of this. So we're not the first state to take money and earmark it for things, right? The sort of classic example is the old state lotteries. When states first implemented lotteries, a lot of them said, you know what, all this money we'll get through the lottery we'll use for education. So you can go back and look, well, did education funding increase as much as lottery revenues? And the answer is no, but it did increase somewhere between 30 and 70 cents for every dollar raised.
30 to 70 is a big range, right?
Well, it varies by state, it varies by the type of earmark, and so it's hard to pin it down. And we have, there are things pointing in both directions here in Massachusetts.
Tell me if I'm right to think of this. Obviously, in Massachusetts, we have a Democrat-dominated legislature that when they want to flex their muscle, there's not really anyone who can check them. Is the fact that we have essentially one-party rule on Beacon Hill, would that make it more or less likely that this money will be used as intended? Or is it impossible to say?
Well, I think that could go in either direction, right? It could be less likely because they're very powerful and it's hard to stop them from spending on things they care about. So let's say we are going to have a one-party majority for a long time, but let's say they get really passionate about some other issue in the environment or healthcare. It would be very tempting to say, well, let's find a way to divert money to that instead of the targeted areas. And who's going to push back if it
climate change readiness. So we've just discovered we have to make a massive investment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that might not be bad, right? I mean, no one's going to say this. If you're a proponent and you support the tax and you support the earmarks, you're not going to say it's good that we might use it for other priorities. But if you're just a voter who cares about the best use of dollars in the state, it's okay to say lawmakers are going to choose the priorities they care about most at the time of spending.
What about the concern raised about people just getting out of Massachusetts? Affluent people saying, I don't want to have to pay this new tax. I pay enough in taxes already. I'm going to go to Florida or New Hampshire or wherever.
So this one, there is a fair bit of research too, because we're not the first state to do this. Right? New Jersey has a tax on high earners and millionaires. California does as well. So you can go and see how many people left those states. And the short answer is some, but not that many. So that's not the biggest concern. The biggest concern is people hiding their money, not leaving the state, right? As you imagine, this is a tax that's really targeted at people who have the wherewithal, like very high earners, who have the wherewithal to hire tax attorneys, to hire sophisticated accountants, to help them reorganize their income in a way to avoid paying this tax. So we think the real risk in terms of kind of behavioral change and lost revenue is tax avoidance, not people leaving the state.
What could the potential consequences of that sort of tax avoidance be? If a lot of people take that approach, is there any way to quantify it, or is it too early?
No, we did our best to do this. We think you lose about a third of the money, basically, to tax avoidance. So 30%. It's a lot. So if nobody changed their behavior, if we implement this tax and everybody goes on living their life exactly the way they were before, the tax would raise something like $2.1 billion. But if they make the changes that we've seen in other states, some people move, not too many, but some, and lots of people try to hide their money or avoid taxes in other ways, then you end up raising about $1.3 billion, which is a lot less than $2.1 billion, but also still a lot of money. Still a lot of money that you could use for things that legislators care about.
This is super helpful for me and also makes it harder to know how to think about this because it's murky and ambiguous.
And hard to fit into like a 3-minute video.
Yeah, very hard. All right, let's take a crack at question 2. I believe my video is a little shorter than Katie's, probably because I was not as thorough as her, but let's watch what I tried to represent for people about this and you can tell me what I missed. What would question 2 on the Massachusetts ballot do? Question 2 is all about how dental insurance companies in the state spend the money they get from patient premiums. A yes vote would ramp up regulation of those insurers by requiring they spend at least 83% of premium dollars on patient care, as opposed to administrative costs. It would also force insurers to share financial data with state regulators and would give those regulators the power to veto some rate increases. Question 2 supporters say the proposed changes would treat dental insurers like medical insurers and that they're looking to keep a lid on corporate greed. Question 2's opponents warn of unintended consequences, including reduced consumer choice and increased premiums. Spending in this fight suggests that ultimately it's a battle between insurers and practitioners over where patient money ultimately goes. The biggest yes funder is orthodontist Muhabras Kala, who spent upwards of $2 million. On the no side, Delta Dental's Massachusetts subsidiary has spent at least $4.5 million. So, if you want more regulation of how dental insurers spend their patient money, vote yes on question 2. If you want to leave things as they are, vote no. So I'm going to make a confession here. I also did one of these for question 4, which we'll discuss next week, the driver's license issue. And I found it tough to get excited about question 2 because, again, it seemed to me like here's 2 parts of the dental industry fighting for money that we're pumping into it. Ultimately, it's not going to make that big a deal. Was I wrong to
I don't think you're wrong. I mean,
okay.
Ballot questions come in a couple of different types. Some of them are really technical. And this is one of those. I mean, do voters know if 83% is the right number for a dental loss ratio? I mean, I'm saying this in the most technical way I can say it, but that's really what the ballot question is about. It's a lot to ask voters, and it's hard to get excited about it. And also, as you say, it's not clear that the stakes are very high. The stakes in the sort of internecine world of the fight between dentists and dental insurers are meaningful.
Yeah.
But in the world of patients whose interaction with dental insurance is, hey, I sometimes go to the dentist and they bill me, is pretty small, right? And so that matters.
So supporters, forgive me, opponents, people who don't want this new requirement implemented have said, hey, slow down because costs could go way up for patients. You could spend 38% more in your dental premiums. That number is highly curated, right? Not necessarily.
I mean, totally implausible, actually, in our assessment of this. So we talked to a number of health economists, and we know where that number comes from. It comes from a study of a very kind of small segment of the market. So
done for dental plans, right?
Well, yeah, by a national dental insurance trade group. So yeah, no, totally implausible. Because think of it this way. Insurance companies, they get money in the form of premiums, they pay out money in the form of covering dental costs.
Yep.
And the whole point here is they're not paying out enough, at least according to supporters. They need to pay out more, they need to pay out 83%. So how do you do that? Well, either you take in less, lower premiums, or you pay out more. The idea that you would have to raise premiums cuts against the whole premise here, which is, no, you need to take in less and pay out more, or pay out a higher share of what you're taking in. So are there weird edge cases where you might have to raise premiums? Sure, if you're not a very successful or efficient insurer, but no, I don't think patients should be worried about increased premiums. They might worry a little bit about increased costs at the dentist, but again, not a huge deal.
What about the question of choice? Because that's another thing that people who are opposed to this proposed requirement warn about. You're going to have a smaller range of plans available. Is that a legitimate concern to raise?
So one thing that's a little bit unclear here is how close are insurers to this new 83% rule, right? So if they're really close, then no, it's fine. They'll make slight adjustments. They'll change their accounting practices. They'll hit the new requirements, and the system will go on as it has been going on. And our assessment is, yeah, that's the most likely case. They are pretty close. They're in the 70s, right?
Especially the bigger ones, right?
That's right, particularly the bigger ones. They're already spending, 70, 75 cents of every dollar they get in premiums on care. So could they get to 83? Sure. If that's wrong, and actually they're in the 50s, and they're taking in twice as much as they're paying out, then getting to 83 will be really hard. And some of them won't, and there might be some cascading effects where they have to change their business plans. But as I say, we don't think that's very likely, and all the evidence points to them being relatively close and able to make this transition without dramatic impact on the dental world.
Thank you for all that. Extremely useful, and we will dig into 3 and 4 next week, same time, same place.
I'll be here. Dressed differently, but I'll be here.
Evan Horowitz, thank you.
Thank you.